I mean, the reason I got involved at all was because of my dad. I was 18 whenever he was killed. And that had happened. I mean, he was killed the same year that he published the Common Sense document, which was arguing for a devolved administration in Northern Ireland, an agreement between the people of Northern Ireland, Protestant and Catholic, to accept the boundaries that they were willing to live within, written constitution and a Bill of Rights to protect that. And the IRA killed him within months. Now, I probably would not have got involved in politics otherwise. And I felt there was things that were being said. He was looking at a future beyond the conflict. And in any conflict around the world, whenever there are resolutions, it's generally the people who've been involved in the conflict who drive the solutions.
Yeah.
And you've got that dichotomy. So before the ceasefires, the person who was in my position up until July of who was leading the UDP at that time, Ray Smallwoods, was killed by the IRA. And then 6 weeks later was the IRA ceasefire. So it's very difficult not to have a very kind of jaundiced view of what was going on within Republicans' brains at the time. Really what they were trying to do was take the head off the body in terms of political unionism, or political loyalism rather. But at the same time, it didn't change my view that if we were to have any potential to actually find a settlement here, is that everybody still had to be involved. At some point it had to stop. At some point the violence had to stop, and there had to be something to replace it.
Gary, as you said, you've been castle building for a long time in the talks before Sinn Féin came in, but when they came in then, that run to Christmas was we did a lot of talking, but we didn't make a lot of progress. I suppose we had identified the parameters and the framework, that it was the three strands. It was decommission, it was police, it was parity of esteem and prisoners and all of the issues. But up to Christmas we didn't make much progress. And then of course when we adjourned for Christmas, things got even worse, because there was the killing in the prison, and then there were killings on both Republicans and Loyalist side. And by the time we came back in January, we weren't in a great position.
No, I don't think there was ever a great position.
No.
Throughout any of that time, and definitely around the end of '97, it really things took a turn for the worse. You had violence happening by Loyalists, by Republicans. My party was expelled from the talks for a period. Sinn Féin were expelled from the talks for a period. So there wasn't an awful lot of optimism. But at the same time, there was everything that happened in terms of putting things together, which led to Good Friday, all happened within those months. So it was over that period, over Christmas, that that there was the energy was going into starting to put things onto the table, because we spent a year and a half talking about procedures, and that actually what we were going to talk about in terms of what substantively was going to be part of an agreement. But we were agreeing, I think at that stage, that everything had to be there on the table and to be negotiated in order to make that, to be able to move things forward. And that nothing was going to be agreed until everything was going to be agreed. But there was nothing to agree. But I think that as negative as all of that was, as difficult a period as that was, it probably put lit a fire under everybody. In order to say, we got to get this moving.
Mitchell started telling us we need to hurry up.
Well, yeah, but I mean the downside of that was that all of that activity then was concentrated into a few months, and there was a huge mountain to climb in a very short period of time. And even though I suppose that was achieved, in terms of reached the agreement, supported at a referendum, not by everybody, but by enough.
Would you have thought, Gary, that some of I think it's your view that some of the things that we left fairly ambiguous in those talks because we were pushing to a deadline, that if we had to put more thought into some of them, I suppose particularly the decommissioning, it might have been better?
Well, at the time, I thought it was the right move, but I don't really think that now. On reflection, I've seen what has happened since then. I think that the deadline that was set was a disadvantage in some ways, because there hadn't been the time in order to bottom out some of those most difficult issues, like decommissioning, how we deal with the legacy of the conflict, and even within some of the things which were agreed, not everybody was happy with all elements of it. There was bits that were hard to sell. And I kind of think now that while at the time dealing with parking some of those things or offsetting some of those things in order to be dealt with later on was just kicking the problem down the road. When we were there to do a difficult job, we may as well have sorted all the difficult questions out at that time. But I think it would have needed more time given to the process in order to make that possible. Because everybody, I think, was walking out on Good Friday thinking, well, this is good. This is difficult for everyone. Everyone's got, having to make sacrifices here. There are bits that are going to be hard for each of us in terms of our different constituencies. But there's some things that we couldn't iron out, and maybe that's good's going to be good enough here, and it'll, but I think that we allowed for some issues to continue to contaminate the process, and that just slowed everything down,
Do you think, are you looking back, and I suppose it's, George Mitchell set that deadline, Holy Thursday. He said he's going back to Heather and to the family, to his young son, and Tony Blair was heading to Spain. So all of a sudden we had 4 or 5 days to try and to do a huge amount of work. Do you think some of those issues? I get what you're saying, that if we had spent more time, would it have been a help if there had been more direct dialogue between Sinn Féin and the UDP and the PUP? Like if there had been, I mean, in the end, you guys, without the two governments all over you every hour of every day, you guys were the ones who had control over some of the contentious issues.
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, one of the things I remember, Sinn Féin came to our door and the PUP's door in the last kind of hours of the negotiations, trying to get us to back them on prisoner release around a shorter period of time.
Around 2 years.
Yeah, the 6 months or 18 months or something like that. And we wouldn't back him. Just told him that we weren't willing to do that because we knew that it was going to cause more problems for the wider community in terms of what was on the table was difficult enough, and I think that I think there were people felt that actually perhaps between Sinn Féin and loyalism there were common issues, but there wasn't really around those things. Actually, and they weren't the most important issues to us. They were most important issues to others. it was the other aspects of the agreement and the relationships and the structures of in Northern Ireland and the relationships across, which were the most important parts for us. It was about settling the constitutional question and creating a process and structures that put decision making in the hands of people where it needed to be. That was in the hands of the people of Northern Ireland, and for there to be no room for change through violence. I certainly felt that while there was a lot of positivity, around, well, and rightly so. I mean, we were agreeing something that 6 months ago nobody believed was possible, and where we hadn't even got the bare bones together, even though I'd been talking for a long time, around what that agreement would look like. We got something over the line, which I think was a very good, a very good model, a very good agreement. But we still had a very divided society, and we're walking into that where even at the time of the referendum, 71% of people in Northern Ireland supported the agreement at the referendum, but that was only about 55% of unionism. So you're walking out of the agreement thinking, we've really achieved something here. But that we're walking into the next phase of this is where there is a narrow margin that has to be held in order to make this work. And that would have worked better if we had continued to be involved in the process.
Yeah.